Oh my goodness, welcome back. History or His Story.
Oh boy.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Dan. I do a little bit of history thing. I've got Panda and Bran with me. I'm going to try to stump them.
Hey.
How you doing, boys?
Guys,
oh my goodness.
Can I tell you what's exciting about this podcast?
Please
the
do.
only history podcast available.
It's the only one.
Yeah.
The only one, yeah.
You know what's funny is our other podcast is Deck the Hallmark is in the comedy category. Way more entries in the comedy category than the history category.
Sure.
But this is the only history podcast that you would want to listen to.
Right, because it's more fun.
It's history. It's intrigue. It's a game show.
It's a
Conspiracy,
hybrid.
really.
It really is history for dummies, or not for dummies, but like you can play along at home. And if you're a history buff, you'll probably get them all right. If you're not a history buff, you're going to have fun trying to kind of peel through all the layers to see where I'm lying, where I'm telling the truth. Guys, if you haven't heard us yet, welcome. You can find us on the socials at His Story Podcast. At His Story Podcast.
Story Podcast. That's exactly
Instagram,
right.
Twitter. You can find us online. HistoryOrHisStory.com. HistoryOrHisStory.com. Follow, like, rate, review us. Do all of those things. Help us keep the history fun going. And the goal is to do these once a week for an entire season, like 30 plus weeks.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Man.
Maybe get you to spring break.
2020. 2020. Be in the middle of primary season. I know no one's tired of election stuff by that point.
No.
No.
Yeah.
Still completely on board.
I'm excited.
Over still 12 Democratic candidates come March.
Oh, under. I think it'll be like
I think we're going to get more.
7 or 8.
Let's just
keep piling them on. Guys, has the cool weather agreed with you? You enjoying yourself?
I've enjoyed
I love
it.
it. Fall is my favorite, as far as weather goes. Obviously, I like Christmas. But this is really when I start to shine as a human.
Well,
so,
yeah,
I will say you've sparkled more than you normally have.
You're glowing.
Thank you.
All right, you guys ready to get this thing started?
Let's do it.
Please do.
So here's the deal. I'm going to tell them 3 stories. After each story, these guys are going to get 3 minutes of question and answer time. After the third story and question and answer time is complete, they will confer amongst themselves and each give an answer to which story they believe to be the incorrect one. So,
and I think currently are we tied?
We are. We're at one game apiece.
That's right.
And so this is the 4th episode.
And so you've missed that. So not the best, but you guys are getting comfortable with it. You're getting used to it. So typically how we start is I'm going to give you the title of all 3 stories.
Great.
And you will then get to choose the order in which you want to hear those stories. These stories all have to do with the Civil War. All 3 of them. That's right. I know. And you know a lot about the Civil War.
I do. I do. I'm a very civil person.
I've watched the first part of Ken Burns' documentary. Part one.
Part one. Okay. Did you get through all 2 hours, 3 hours, part 1?
Sure.
You DVR'd it.
He made a new. Did you watch the Ken Burns country documentary?
I haven't watched Ken Burns.
People have really been talking.
Ken Burns needs to calm it down.
I think I would like to watch a Ken Burns documentary about Ken Burns documentaries.
Yeah. No. We can all narrate it. And do our best Ken Burns.
And it's just a lot of us getting closer.
It was at this point Ken Burns popped out of bed and said, "Baseball."
Let's do a 40-hour expose on baseball.
And did you know that in iMovie on Macs, when you want to if you put a picture in there, the default setting is the Ken Burns setting.
Yep, that's
so
true.
A picture goes in, and then the next picture automatically comes out.
Wow,
Yeah.
I love it.
Ken Burns has a setting.
He has a setting.
He needed 100 hours on the Vietnam War still, I guess.
That's right.
All right, the 3 Civil War stories. Story number 1: Ulysses S Grant. Greatest general or America's most famous singer-songwriter?
Okay.
Stay with me. Story 2. Chef kills and cooks Robert E. Lee's pet chicken.
Man, these are good ones.
And story 3. Stonewall Jackson, hypochondriac.
I like the pet chicken one, personally.
I'm down with a pet chicken.
Let's go
pet
chicken.
Pet chicken, okay.
Pet chicken, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah.
What do you mean go from there?
Dealer's choice.
With dealer's choice from there.
I'll go in the order I read them. So pet chicken, and then Ulysses S. Grant, and then Stonewall Jackson.
Okay, great.
In these 3 stories, we're going to talk about 3 of the main figures of the Civil War: Stonewall Jackson, Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant. If you did not catch on,
I knew that.
All right, of course you did. Story number 1 starts right now. All right, so you guys should know who Robert E. Lee is, right?
Yes.
What do you know about Robert E. Lee?
Confederate general. Did you say KFC general?
He was the general of KFC.
And he racist?
Yeah, he was a racist.
That's always just whenever we're in this time frame, I'm always just like,
if
racist.
you were white in the 1800s, there was a very solid chance you were a racist. A lot of people think that Robert E. Lee didn't own slaves, but fought because it was his home state. He did own slaves at points in his life, so that also is untrue.
That's why I said it.
That's why you said racist.
Yeah.
So if you owned a slave, regardless of the time period or context, we have to call you a racist. Yes.
Sure.
So technically, you're right.
Thank you.
So most people think that Robert E. Lee was general over all of the Civil War soldiers of the South. That he was the guy, and he went all the way through the Southeast and the Deep South. The reality was Robert E. Lee was, for the majority of the Civil War, the general of the Army of Northern Virginia. Now, why was that important? Two reasons. One is Virginia was the most important territory in the Civil War. Why was it the most important territory in the Civil War? Do you guys know?
Because it was the thing that separated the South from the North.
It was the last state before the North, but also held the capital of the Confederacy, which was Richmond, Virginia.
Now, that was going to be what?
Yeah. Abraham Lincoln has a three-pronged strategy to defeat the South in the Civil War. One, cut off the Atlantic Ocean and block off all the trade. Two, cut off the Mississippi River, so trap them into the southern region. And three, capture Richmond, Virginia. Now, he's able to do the first two pretty quickly. Atlantic Ocean, Mississippi River, and then they cannot capture Richmond, Virginia. Why can't they? Because of the heroism of Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia. This is the army that originally flew the Confederate flag. Most people think the Confederate flag was flown across the South during the Confederacy. By and large, it was the flag of the Battle of the Army of Northern Virginia. That's where the flag gets its heritage. So Robert E. Lee spends the majority of his time in the Civil War in his home state of Virginia, not roaming around the South wherever he goes. Now, he gains quite a legendary reputation for being a guy that is impenetrable. He's been called by several authors as just gray, just depressed all the time, with a singular focus of winning this war, and nothing would please him and nothing brought a smile to his face. But he also is known legendary for battles like in Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, where he would have half of the soldiers of the Union Army and he would still defeat them in battle. At the end of the day, the problem was for the Confederacy, the Union had more of everything. So the Civil War is a battle of tangibles versus intangibles. Okay, so the Civil War, the Union has the tangibles, has the troops, has the guns, has more people, has all that stuff. The South has these immeasurable things, the spirit of the South, the leadership of Robert E. Lee. And after about 4 years, the intangibles just don't win out, and Robert E. Lee loses, and Richmond, VA finally does get captured. However, before all that happens in 1865, in 1862, a Virginia farmer sent Robert E. Lee's troops an entire shipment of chickens from his farm. Now, why would he do that? Because the South didn't have much food at their disposal. And so this guy was doing his part. He sent it to Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia, and they had chickens to eat. Well, one chicken was a little black hen that escaped during their unloading of the chicken boxes. Now, this hen finds an open tent on the campground, goes in the tent, goes under the cot in the tent, lays an egg, and sits on the egg. It's Robert E. Lee's tent. Okay, so Robert E. Lee comes to his tent, finds this hen. They've already got all the chickens killed, beheaded, plucked, all that good stuff. And he finds that the hen has laid an egg. Robert E. Lee was rigorously routine-based. So he would have an egg for breakfast every single morning. And that was a big deal for the Confederate Army because they were really, really poor. So he saw the egg and he said he went to his chef, used to be his slave, and then was then his chef and not his slave. That's a different story for a different day. Basically, he says, I want you to lay this egg. And then he names this hen Nellie. Now, Nellie becomes like the Army of Northern Virginia's mascot. She runs all around the campground. No one touches Nellie. Nellie gets to do whatever she wants. She travels with them from battle to battle. Before Gettysburg, she's on their campground. She sleeps in Robert E. Lee's tent every single night. One of the few things they say ever brought a smile to Robert E. Lee's face. Nellie the hen lays an egg, and almost every morning would lay an egg, and the chef would make the egg for Robert E. Lee for breakfast, and Nellie would have the run of the roost, no pun intended. So what happens? Let me tell you. They are about to start the Wilderness Campaign. Now, the Wilderness Campaign takes place in May of 1864, which is after Gettysburg. And most people think that Grant fought Lee a lot. Not actually the case. Grant was on the Mississippi. Lee was in Virginia. But in the Wilderness Campaign, this is after the Mississippi's been taken. This is Grant versus Lee for like one of the first times. Okay, it's a big time battle. It's considered a draw, although the Union is the one who removed their troops, and tactically that helped them in the long run. Long story short, it's a big deal. And the night before this wilderness campaign is going to start, Lee invites all of his generals to dinner. Invites them all to dinner. They're going to sit down and have some sort of a meal that would be more civilized than a normal war meal. And his chef is worried because they don't have much food left. It's 1864. Things are rough. And so he looks around and he's going to make them what amounts to bread pancakes. And so instead of doing that, he decides in serving generals, it would be better that they would have meat at the table. So he captures Nellie the hen, 2-year pet of Robert E. Lee, beheads Nellie, plucks Nellie, and then serves Nellie with butter and bread stuffing. The meal is a huge hit with the generals, including Robert E. Lee. And toward the end of the meal, Robert E. Lee begins to become suspicious as to where his chef has procured a chicken.
Oh, no.
So he questions his chef, and his chef comes clean immediately and said, it was a meal for generals. We didn't have any food. This is what I had to do. Lee is heartbroken, and for the remainder of the war, which is over a year, at every meal, chides his chef about killing his pet and friend during the Civil War. That is the end of story number 1. Your 3 minutes of questions starts right now.
If that story's true, I don't want to continue with this. This is the saddest moment in history that I've ever heard.
Now remember, the Civil War is responsible for the most loss of American life ever. So this
but also Nellie. I mean, what a bummer.
So the chef was very much aware, like he knew what
chef knew what he was doing.
Wait. Was there ever a day that Nellie didn't lay that egg?
Yes. Well, the only reason that I know that is because in reading about this, it said that almost every day chef would lay the egg, and that was a quote from a primary source document of basically people that they get all these from.
He said primary source to make it sound like it's a true story.
Well, he's a subscriber to Chicken Email.
Chicken Source Magazine. Chickensource.com.
I have a question for you. How big's this chicken?
It was a hen, so probably smaller than a rooster.
So you're telling me that this hen feeds the entire generals?
Yeah, we're talking about 5 people. We're talking the...
Yeah, but still, that's a tiny hen.
Yeah.
A hen ain't feeding 5 people.
But imagine if you've not had meat for a week. Then just a little bit of meat goes a long way.
A little bit of meat goes a long ways.
That's true. It's beyond meat.
So he was a fan of when you say that he got suspicious, like towards the end, he started to ask questions. What was was there a fight? Did a fight break out? Did they have to hold him back from being so upset about Nellie?
No, and I don't know. The problem is with a lot of Civil War stuff, a lot of the emotion is taken out. Like any picture from the Civil War, which is the first war that cameras are used in, everyone's stolid and doesn't show their teeth because A, they may not have had teeth, but B, this is the one picture to remember you by. And so the accounts of this story that are mostly just accounts of journals written by soldiers are, Robert E. Lee waited to the end of the meal. This could have been because he was not suspicious until the end of the meal. It could have been because
it was really good.
Robert E. Lee was not going to go nuts in front of a bunch of generals. He was going to address the issue like Robert E. Lee would address the issue.
Did they figure out a way to get him eggs every day after Nellie?
All I know is that was a routine of Robert E. Lee. So getting an egg was an important part of his morning.
It was hard to find a chicken.
Yeah.
And so if Nellie's dead and gone.
Yeah. And maybe it was something that obviously he gave up afterwards.
Guys, I'm so depressed.
No, don't be.
No.
The Civil War is not exactly a light, fun time in history. Although the Grant story is, it's worth but yeah.
Nellie.
You got any more questions?
No.
I think I'm about done.
All right.
Time's
with
almost
7
up.
seconds to spare, you guys are done. Very good. We ready for the next story?
I guess.
You just need to process, Nellie.
Is it better?
We'll go to the lighthearted one. We'll go to the lighthearted one next.
Let's do a lighthearted one.
Let's do a lighthearted one. All right.
What's the title of this one?
The title of the story is Ulysses S. Grant, greatest general or America's famous singer-songwriter.
Ooh, I'm excited about that. I love a good singer-songwriter.
I bet you do.
He's pretty much the Bob Dylan of his time.
Yeah. No, a lot of war protest songs from Grant. All right. Story number 2 starts right now. So Ulysses S. Grant, just for fun, do you know what his middle name is?
S.
Seville.
His middle name, like the barber of Seville. Yeah,
sure.
No. His middle name is actually Ulysses. S meant nothing. It was nice for his slogan, U.S. Grant. His name originally was Hiram Ulysses S. Grant, which spells hug, which I just think you need to know in life.
Oh, that's nice
in general.
because
That's
you need
pleasant.
a hug right now.
I do.
Yeah.
No, I like that. Yeah, I am.
So
No, that's
Ulysses
better.
S. Grant was a very famous Union general during the Civil War. He was not initially in charge of all the troops, but after Lincoln goes through several other generals, Ulysses S. Grant makes a name for himself in Tennessee and then on the Mississippi River campaign. Remember, I already told you Abraham Lincoln wanted to surround the Southerners and make sure he cut off the Mississippi, the Atlantic, and Richmond, Virginia. So Ulysses S. Grant gets famous for his Mississippi River campaign all the way down to the capture of New Orleans, which actually happens early on, and then he works his way back up. So he then goes to Richmond, and they have a process called total war where they finish the war. That is very sad. We'll maybe talk about that here in a little bit. He spends most of the war on the Mississippi River. In fact, in 1863, July 1st to 4th is the Battle of Gettysburg. Most people think Grant was in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. He was not. He was in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Now, Vicksburg, Mississippi was the last Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi River. The siege of Vicksburg, Grant takes Vicksburg, and that means that from New Orleans all the way up the Mississippi and southern land, the Union now has control, which is bad news for the South. Even though Gettysburg is considered to be the turning point of the war, Vicksburg is almost equally as important. So Grant is on the Mississippi River pretty much from 1861 to 1864. Spends most of his time there. Now, a few things you need to know about Grant. Because of his success in the war, he goes on to become president of the United States, even though he had no experience in politics at all. He was an alcoholic who would drink his feelings on a pretty regular basis and was a weirdly quiet soul for a guy that's known to be very violent and enacting the total war principles of Sherman and eventually Lincoln. So this guy's an alcoholic. He's an old soul. He doesn't really like politics. He ends up in politics. It's riddled with scandal, all that good stuff. Well, what if I told you there was a turning point in his life in 1862 where he could have become a very famous singer-songwriter instead? So
I'd be in.
Yeah, I bet you would, because it's one of the few bright spots of the Civil War. So the capture of New Orleans happens in early 1862, and New Orleans becomes a Union city, Union-occupied city. So Northerners are free to move around in the city. There's a lot of interesting stories, especially with a guy named Governor Butler, who's a terrible human being. But basically, there's a lot of Union soldiers that are moving back and forth. There's no fighting going on. New Orleans is a Union-occupied city. So when Grant goes down there in the summer of 1862, after it's been officially captured, it was a place to refuel, a place where you could ship. Obviously, it's the Gulf of Mexico, and now that the Union has control over that. New Orleans is also the start of some of our earliest music recording. Now, music recording was pretty tough to come by in the 1800s, but before music recording existed, these places called music publishing companies, where they could put your sound down and replay it, did exist. So, in New Orleans, the first music publishing company did start. It started by a group of people called the Blackmar Brothers. That is their name. Armand and Henry Blackmar. Armand, they're both from Vermont. They're music teachers. They moved down to the South. They start a music publishing company called the Blackmar Brothers. It's the most successful music publishing company in the Civil War era. And it actually is responsible for recording most of the patriotic songs that were sung during that era by the Union. So Union songs that were sung on the battlefields or by people during the Civil War were recorded at the Blackmar Brothers Music Publishing Company. It's very early music of the Civil War. So during his time in New Orleans, Grant visited the Blackmar Brothers Company, and the Blackmar Brothers had heard that Grant would sing. Not on a regular basis. He was a quiet, gruff exterior, but the rumor was that Grant had this voice that he would sing whether he was bathing or whether he was in his tent. And so they asked him to sing, and sure enough, they were blown away by his voice. They remarked on how great of a voice it was, He recorded a song at Blackmore Brothers. It was a song called Rosalie the Prairie Flower, which was, I don't know, a song from the 1850s that was popular to sing in the 1850s. And during his time in New Orleans, Grant would visit with whiskey, the Blackmore Brothers Company, on a regular basis and hang out with the Blackmore Brothers. So it was at that time that even though the brothers were from Vermont, both of them felt this really weird oppression in New Orleans because they wanted the South and North to get along. That's why they moved down to Vermont to begin with, that they were going to move back up north to start a music publishing company up north. And they tell Grant that he could be the voice of the Blackmore Brothers music publishing company. So they give him an offer to say, hey, either when this is all done or right now, we would love for you to be the voice of the Blackmore Brothers Music Publishing Company, and the songs that we write are the songs that we produce. We would like you to sing them because that's how it was done back then. No one could just go in and get some time at a studio. And Grant, it is said that Grant thought seriously about the offer to leave his life of war and to sing instead. Now, as I told you before, Grant was an alcoholic. He had a love-hate relationship with war, even though that's what he spent most of his time doing. It weighed on him pretty heavily. In fact, he's the reason that Robert E. Lee was never punished for his crimes in a court of law, because he just felt like as though the damage had been done. And so after asking, Grant thought about it for a while, and it's on record that he was given this new opportunity and he gave it some serious thought, but felt such a strong obligation to President Lincoln and what Lincoln was doing and the trust that Lincoln had in Grant, that he couldn't abandon the Union cause. And because of his success in the Civil War and his rise to fame, his star was so huge at the end of 1865, he ends up in a life of politics that he hates. So because he turns it down and he sticks with war, he ends up being president for 8 years. A ton of scandal during his time, whiskey taxes going to his cabinet, all these problems. Secretary of War is a mess. He's an alcoholic that never really lives to his fullest because he passed up an opportunity to be the voice of a generation and to honor his country instead. That concludes story number 2. Your 3 minutes of questions starts right now.
Was there such thing as like famous singers back then? No,
there were not.
Okay.
So this would have been, it wasn't about fame. It was about, they had found a voice that could record all of these songs.
I was just wondering, was there a tug for him like to be like a, no.
But Grant was not a fame boy. He wasn't.
Sure.
He wasn't a fame boy.
What did they record on?
It was very early equipment. So like record players would exist and phonograph, and you would have a microphone like they would use early for telegraph and telephone.
Okay.
Did he ever lay down a track?
They recorded the Rosalie the Prairie. What is it? Rosalie Prairie something.
Does it exist? Like, can you still hear it today?
No, you cannot. In fact, most of what the Blackmore Brothers did cannot be found today.
Wow. Did the Blackmore Brothers ever find the voice that they were looking for to be the voice of a generation?
You know, when they move out of New Orleans, they don't find any success. So New Orleans has always been a place of a lot of culture, and there's a lot of reasons for that, dating back to when the Spanish lived there, and then you have northern and southern occupation at the same time. And so when they leave and go up north, it's just not received well, and they never become anything famous, even though they're the first music producing company in the country to exist.
Huh. Did the Blackmore Brothers did they come from money to be able to afford to buy such equipment? Where did they get their money? Did they come what money did they come from?
So they were both socialites in Vermont. So they were born in Vermont, grew up there. Their parents were socialites in Vermont. So usually old money was money back then. So in the 1860s, if you had the class structure was a lot more defined. So they grew up.
I would imagine buying that early on musical.
The equipment wasn't expensive because nobody cared. Nobody thought that was the next way. You know what I mean? Like we're so early on that it you know, I'm sure like phonograph or telegraph equipment would have been quite a bit. But aside from that, I mean, just moving down there.
Panda?
They heard Grant sing and he had a voice of an angel. Is that kind of the premise there?
They had heard when you say it like that, they had heard a rumor that Grant had a good voice, and Grant was did I say that the music publishing house was next to a bar downtown?
Yeah.
So he was drinking. They were there, and they basically said, "Hey, we'd love for you to sing for us." And he did. He obliged.
Was he more of a bass, baritone?
Tenor.
Tenor.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
tenor,
Yeah,
wow,
tenor
yeah.
voice.
I guess my last question would be this. Why are you lying about this one?
Wow.
Oh,
Bold.
Coming
Man.
on in strong.
Here's why I think that he's lying. He probably Googled. Oh, I'm running out of time.
Yeah. I'd love to hear, though.
I'll tell you later.
Okay. Good talk. Last story. You guys ready for the last story?
Oh, bring it
You're
on.
Good? Bring it on.
Tell me a little bit about my boy Stonewall.
The last story is Stonewall Jackson, Hypochondriac. And to be fair, this story requires a lot more reading than the other ones do because of just how ridiculous Stonewall Jackson was.
Correct.
To be fair. All right.
I believe in you and your reading abilities.
Thanks. Story number 3 starts right now. So, Stonewall Jackson is a very famous figure of the Civil War. He's incredibly famous, especially in the South, and people look to him as a hero, almost to the point where you cannot believe it. My aunts and uncle that live in the low state of South Carolina have a mural of Stonewall Jackson on their wall.
Oh, boy.
True story. So, Thomas Jackson is Stonewall Jackson's real name. He's a Confederate general during the Civil War. Early on in the Civil War, he earns distinction for his command at the First Battle of Bull Run, after which the Union continues to try to advance in Virginia, and Stonewall's men hold a line. And there's a guy named Barnard B. who writes about Stonewall Jackson, and he says Thomas Jackson and his men held the line like a stone wall. And so that's the nickname Stonewall. And if you have a nickname like Stonewall, people in the South are going to give you respect immediately. So at the Battle of Chancellorsville, which is another big win for Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson is accidentally shot by a Confederate soldier. So by his own man, he's shot by a picketer, which is a man on the picket lines, not on strike, shooting. And he loses his left arm to amputation. And then he dies of pneumonia. The amputation goes through fine. He dies of pneumonia 8 days later. Remember that, because it's going to come back around at the very end of this story. Now, here's the thing about Stonewall Jackson. He's known as this big, powerful general, but the reality is that Stonewall Jackson either had a mental illness, had a undiagnosable hernia, or he was a rabid hypochondriac. So what does that mean? Stonewall Jackson felt out of balance in battle if he did not raise one arm while he was on his horse at all times. He felt as though that balanced his blood. This is all on the record in a journal. It balanced his blood if he raised one arm all the time while riding.
What does that even mean?
I don't know.
Okay.
He felt that pepper made his left leg weak. So when he ate the pepper, his left leg would get a little wonky. He would suck on lemons all day long because he believed he had massive dyspepsia. Does anybody know what dyspepsia means?
A lack of
Pepsi.
Think about, well, forget it. We don't have time for that. You guys are so terrible.
A lack of
it's
pepper.
Indigestion is what, and he believed that lemons or a lot of acid would help his indigestion.
I can see where he came up with that.
Yeah. So he would suck on lemons all day long, even though it was a very tough fruit to find for Civil War. Like he would just go through lemons like crazy, even though his soldiers were just like, starving. Most of his meals contained only 3 ingredients: raspberries, bread, and milk. That's it. That's all he would eat most of the time because he felt as though his dyspepsia would get out of control if he didn't eat those 3 things. He only felt comfortable when standing straight up. So he would literally stand straight up until he fell asleep. So he was so tired he would have to almost pass out. He'd have to sit down and lay down. He would read either Virginian constitutions or the Bible and just memorize them because he only felt comfortable if he was standing up. My man was crazy.
Yeah.
He was crazy. That was true even when he was at war. He would stand in his tent all the time. He would always be standing. He never liked to sit down. That's probably why when he sat on his horse, he had to hold. So he complained of all the following symptoms: rheumatism, Keebelanes, poor eyesight, cold feet, nervousness, neuralgia, impaired hearing, tonsillitis, distortion of the spine, and many others. Okay. These were all consistent, constant complaints of Stonewall Jackson in the midst of, fighting and stuff. Ironically, modern physicians theorize that if Jackson did not have hypochondria, his only other thing he could have had was what is called a diaphragmatic hernia, which basically sits on your organs and untreated causes someone to feel as though they have all of these problems. That's what would cause it. If you had this hernia from a little time you were a little boy and it continued to rupture or continued to be present, then you would feel all of these things: out of alignment, heartburn, indigestion, consistently feeling like you don't have your faculties about you, all of these things. Now, another thing that Thomas Stonewall Jackson would do in order to cure or help his dyspepsia was he would ask for cold rags to be placed along his abdomen. Now, how difficult is it to find cold rags during the Civil War in the South? Very. But in the mornings, when it was cold especially, he would have nurses dip rags in cold water, and he would lay down. He'd been standing probably most of the night, and he would have cold rags laid upon him, and he felt as though that cured or helped his dyspepsia. So, flash back to the getting shot. He gets shot. He gets amputated by said shot. And then he has to obviously rest because he's lost a limb. Even in the Civil War, there was some time to rest. Well, as he's resting, he asked the nurses to make sure they cover his abdomen with cold rags all over his abdomen. And most people think that that's how he contracted pneumonia and died.
Huh.
Wow.
So his hypochondria is responsible for his death, could be even more so than the amputation or him getting shot by friendly fire, which is what his death is attributed to. Long story short, Stonewall Jackson was crazy. That ends story 3. Your 3 minutes of questions starts right now.
What did old Stonewall Jackson do before the Civil War?
He was at West Point. He was at West Point. He was a farmer, and then he went to West Point, and then he received great marks. In fact, Grant, when he was a plebe at West Point, Grant was a senior or the upperclassman, and Grant has some very famous quote about him. Like, he was just a weird dude, like just saying he was a very weird guy.
Sure.
His mental faculties weren't all about him.
But he was a good general.
He was amazing, a legendary general. I mean, regardless of, good is relative, but
sure.
But he gained, if the legend is true, print the legend. That's what Liberty Valance says. Like, at the end of the day, his legend superseded himself. Like, it was more important than what he actually did.
Sure.
Did people respect him?
Yes.
Or did they have a hard time because he was so crazy?
No, I think that's why he got away with it. I think that's the only way you get away with this nonsense. Like, anybody else, they're going to tell you you're crazy, but because he was such a revered general, he was able to get away with what amounts to just crazy and eating all the food that people would need to cook with.
Did so there's the theory that the thing it could be a real thing.
Diaphragmatic hernia.
Yeah. Are there people that believe that is actually the way, like, it's
modern?
true?
So modern physicians. So physicians of any modern medicines the last 60 years. Modern physicians believe that was a high possibility. No way to prove it.
Oh, well, okay.
Yeah.
So does that mean that he's not, like, if that's true, does that mean he's not crazy?
The problem is there's no way to prove it. So, there's a chance. I mean, you can be a hypochondriac and not be crazy. But those are the only 3 explanations. And based upon records and journals we would have to say that he's a hypochondriac.
Did he have any other interesting tics besides the health concern, like the
he was fairly interesting all the way around. If you read quotes by Stonewall Jackson, you're going to find that a lot of it makes very little sense. Like, it makes sense and that he knows what he's talking about, but like, you could tell that there's some quirks and some eccentricities there. He's not the standard Confederate general, right? Like, who just takes the bullet, keeps on going, stays on his horse, holds the line. Like, this is not a guy you would think would hold the line for 30 days, right? But that's what he was.
And you mean to tell me that this guy had his arm amputated, he comes to, and the first thing he says is,
yes,
cold rags.
Yep, correct.
Okay.
Nothing if not dedicated.
That's right. Yep.
Cold rags.
Do you have any more?
I don't have anything.
All right. So here are the 3 stories. Just to recap, we have Robert E. Lee's hen, Nellie. Poor Nellie gets killed by his chef and eaten for a general's dinner. We have Ulysses S. Grant. Turns out he could have had a singing contract. New Orleans, the Blackmore Brothers. And then we have Stonewall Jackson, who is a hypochondriac.
All right.
It's conference time.
Yeah. So what are you thinking?
I don't want the Nelly story to be true,
yeah,
but I think it might be true.
I do too.
I also think that Stonewall Jackson was crazy.
Okay. So you think it's?
I think it's the Grant story.
Well, that's what I was going to go with, but I don't want to be tied anymore.
Okay.
I think that one is not true because he gave the title of the song, and I think that's a bluff. He said, "Here's the title of the song. It's some song from back yonder."
Right.
He probably Googled popular songs in the 1800s.
Right.
Picked that song and threw it in there.
Well, and I don't think they had recording equipment back there then.
I'm gonna go with I'll go with the Nelly story.
You'll go Nelly. I'm gonna go Grant.
You're going Nelly. You're going Grant.
Yeah.
Nelly's story 100% true.
Ah.
He did kill his chicken. Grant's story is false.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, and I knew it was going to be a tough sell. Everything I said about that story is true aside from Grant being involved. Blackmore Brothers existed. Yeah. They did have a publishing company in New Orleans. That song existed. Everything about that story is true except for Grant's involvement. He was not a singer, not to our knowledge, nor does he have any sort of background in that at all.
I should have gone for the tie. I knew that one was fake, but I just went against it.
Well, you know what, Brand? Sometimes you lose.
Sometimes you have to play the bigger game.
Sometimes you do. Sometimes you do.
And the bigger game in this case led you astray. Don't hate the player.
I wouldn't hate the player.
I do hate the game.
Yeah.
Boy, you guys, you would never hate the player, but you're saying you would hate the game.
So you hate this podcast?
I like it, okay.
But you mean the bigger game of trying to beat him. You hate that? You wish that competition didn't
I like
exist?
beating him relentlessly. Man. I don't know what I was saying.
Wow. Well, you guys got me. I mean, you did. You both really figured it out. I knew it was going to be a tough sell, but, I did the best I could.
You did.
I will say, next game, I'm bringing my A game again because I brought it this time too. But I just, I am not thinking bigger. I'm going to start thinking bigger because this is a long season.
Yeah,
it's a long season.
A lot can happen.
That's right. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. And so I'm going to start thinking bigger because I do know for a fact that I will win the season.
Yeah.
And because of that,
is this the post game presser?
Yeah. Yeah. I know for a fact I'm going to win the season. I'm going to show up next week and just do better. And I'll, you know what? I'm going to make a guarantee right now. From now until Christmas, I'm not missing around. I'm not every week I'm going to be right.
Bold move.
Now until Christmas. That's what is that, like 4 or 5 weeks from now?
Sure.
I don't think I can. If you go on a run like that, I can't beat you.
No. There's no way to. Nobody's been on a run like that since Scuffy McGee.
Yeah, listen, but Scuffy McGee's season was, unfortunately, we weren't recording at the time.
We weren't.
Yeah. Fun fact: we used to show up for years now. Every year we would show up and we would do this, but we just didn't record.
We never recorded. It was just for funsies.
Yeah.
Guys, if you want to hear Brandon go on that streak, there's one way to do it. It's to subscribe, listen. History, His Story Podcast. You can go to historyOrHisStory.com or at His Story Podcast. Those are the two ways to follow us. Please like us on the socials.
That's right.
Please follow us on the socials. Please subscribe, and please leave us an iTunes review. All those things are super helpful, and it makes us feel like we're on the right track.
That's exactly right. And you know what? We are currently in the middle of a marathon of watching and reviewing 40 Hallmark Christmas movies over on our other podcast, Deck the Hallmark. So you can find that at deckthehallmark.com. We're a part of the Bramble Jam Podcast Network. So the whole network of podcasts created by the boys. So we've got more planned for 2020, so stay tuned for that.
Can't wait. And until next time,
if it's not history,
it's his story. I'm so sorry.